At my son's wedding, his bride told me to leave. I canceled all the wedding payments, and that was the moment everything I had worked for, sacrificed, and dreamed of came crashing down around me. I had spent decades of my life pouring every ounce of my energy into raising my boy, giving him the best future I could afford, and making sure that when this day came, he would stand tall, proud, and without worry. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and comment where you are watching from. But instead of being honored as the man who built this moment, I was discarded like trash, humiliated in front of a crowd of guests who turned to watch me with a mixture of confusion, pity, and disbelief. Imagine being told you don't belong at your own child's wedding. That is the cruelty I faced. The music was still playing faintly in the background when she turned to me, her eyes sharp, her smile poisonous, and her voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "You should leave. This is our day, not yours." For a second, I thought I had misheard her. Surely, no bride would dare to throw out the father of the groom on such a day. But when I looked at her again, I saw no mistake, no hesitation, just raw arrogance and contempt. She meant every word. The room grew heavy with silence, and then I heard the whispers starting among the guests. My hand trembled slightly at my side, not from weakness, but from the sheer weight of betrayal. I searched my son's face, praying he would stand up, defend me, say something, anything that would stop this nightmare. But he said nothing. His lips pressed together, his gaze averted, and he allowed her words to hang in the air like a death sentence. That silence cut deeper than any insult. I felt my body moving before my mind caught up, my feet carrying me toward the exit as the bride's satisfied smirk followed me out of the hall. Each step echoed against the polished floor, each beat of my heart thudding with humiliation. My throat burned, but I would not let them see me falter. I would not give them the satisfaction of watching me crumble. Still, inside, I was breaking apart. This was supposed to be the happiest day of his life, and instead it became the day I learned exactly what I meant to them, or rather, what I didn't mean. I had been reduced to a nuisance, an unwanted shadow standing in the way of their perfect photographs and curated social image. The betrayal was complete. You might think that was the end of my story, that I left quietly and let them erase me from the picture. But you would be wrong. That moment, as devastating as it was, marked the beginning of something far greater. Because while she thought she had humiliated me, what she really did was awaken a resolve in me that had been buried beneath years of sacrifice and patience, and she would soon learn that the man she dismissed as nothing still had power. Power she could never have imagined. The silence that followed me out of that hall was deafening, heavier than any noise could have been, pressing down on me with the weight of judgment and pity. I could feel every pair of eyes on my back as I made my way toward the exit, their whispers slicing through the air, each one a reminder of the humiliation I had just endured. My shoes tapped against the polished floor, and the sound seemed unnaturally loud, echoing in a way that only made my isolation clearer. I wanted to keep my head high, to show them that I was unshaken, but inside I was unraveling, each step tearing at the fragile thread that held me together. My hands curled into fists at my sides, not from anger yet, but from the desperate effort to stop them from trembling. I could not let them see how much it hurt. I could not let them see me break. I kept walking, focusing on the doors ahead, on the small glimmer of freedom that waited outside, as if escaping the walls of that hall would free me from the shame clinging to my chest. My throat burned with unshed tears, my chest tightened with the weight of words I wished I could say, but my lips remained sealed. To speak then would have been to beg, to plead for dignity from people who had already stripped it away. My son's silence echoed louder than the bride's command, louder than the gasps, louder than the whispers. That silence screamed that I was alone, abandoned in the very moment when he should have stood by me. I could feel his absence as keenly as a knife between my ribs, the cold realization that I meant so little to him when it mattered most. I pushed open the heavy doors, and as the cool air struck my face, I sucked in a shaky breath, my lungs desperate for something pure after choking on the stench of betrayal inside. The chatter of the street outside carried on as if nothing had happened, as if the world had not just shifted beneath my feet, but inside me the ground had cracked wide open. My vision blurred, not from age but from the tears I refused to let fall, because if I cried now, the humiliation would be complete. I walked faster, away from the hall, away from the guests, away from the life I had built that had turned on me in an instant. Every step felt like dragging chains, but I forced myself forward, unwilling to collapse under the weight of what had just transpired. The air was cold, biting at my cheeks, grounding me in its sharpness, but it did nothing to soothe the burning ache inside my chest. I had never felt so small, so unwanted, so invisible. And yet, even as I walked alone into that silence, there was a flicker deep inside me, a whisper that this moment, as cruel as it was not the end. It was only the beginning of something I had not yet dared to imagine. As I walked into the night, the weight of humiliation pressing on my shoulders, my mind began to wander back through the long years that had led me to this point. Years carved out of blood, sweat, and endless sacrifice, and I could not help but ask myself how it was possible that all of it had come to this bitter end. I remembered the nights I spent working double shifts, my body aching, my eyes burning from exhaustion, yet never once complaining because I told myself it was all for my son, for his future, for the life I wanted him to have. I remembered coming home at dawn, peeling off my boots caked with dust and sweat, sitting at the kitchen table with just enough time to drink a cup of cold coffee before heading back out again, knowing that if I rested too long, the bills would pile up and the dream I had for him would slip further away. I remembered the winters when the house was cold and the heating bill had to wait because tuition had to be paid, when I pulled an extra blanket over myself and told him to take the thicker one because he needed to stay warm for school. I remembered the birthdays when I could not afford grand gifts, so I gave him books, telling him knowledge would carry him further than toys ever could, even though I secretly wished I could give him both. I remembered the day he got accepted into university, how proud I felt as I held the letter in my hands, though pride was quickly joined by the crushing realization that I would have to work harder than ever to pay for it. And I did. I took on extra hours, sold off old possessions, cut back on every personal indulgence I might have allowed myself, all so that he could walk across that stage one day without the shadow of debt hovering over him. I remembered the day he graduated, how I cried quietly at the back of the hall, not just because he had made it, but because I knew I had fulfilled the promise I made to his mother when she lay dying, that I would raise him right, that I would make sure he had the future she wanted for him. And now, standing alone outside the hall where he had just abandoned me, I remembered every dollar I had saved for his wedding and every penny scraped together so that he and his bride could have the kind of day that dreams are made of. I denied myself vacations, new clothes, even small pleasures, because I believed this day would be worth it, because I thought he would look at me with gratitude, with love, with recognition for all I had given. Instead, I was cast aside like I was nothing, humiliated by the very people who had reaped the fruits of my sacrifice. And as that realization sank deeper into me, the sorrow that had been suffocating my chest began to change into something colder, something sharper, a seed of anger that told me all those years of sacrifice could not and would not end with me being treated like this. Her words would not leave me, no matter how hard I tried to shake them from my mind. They clung to me like a curse etched into my very skin, replaying again and again in the cruelest echo. "You don't belong here." I could still hear her voice, sharp and venomous, each syllable a dagger meant to cut me down, not whispered in embarrassment, but projected loud enough for every guest to hear, as if she wanted to mark me as an intruder in a life I had built, in a day I had paid for. The more I tried to block it out, the louder it became, swelling until it drowned out even my own heartbeat. "You don't belong here." The phrase gnawed at me, because this was not the first time I had heard her poison. My mind dragged me back to a memory weeks earlier, one I had buried at the time because I wanted to believe the best in her for my son's sake. I had been walking past the living room, unseen, when I overheard her on the phone with a friend, her tone dripping with disdain. "He's such a burden," she had said, her voice mocking, dismissive, always hovering, always trying to be part of everything. Honestly, if it weren't for his money, I'd tell him to stay away altogether. I remember freezing in that moment, the coffee cup in my hand trembling until I nearly dropped it, my breath catching in my throat. A burden. That was how she saw me, not as the father of the man she was about to marry, not as someone who had poured every ounce of his life into raising him, but as dead weight, an obstacle she would tolerate only as long as my wallet stayed open. I told myself then to ignore it, that maybe I had misheard, that maybe stress had twisted her words, but deep down I knew the truth. And now her public outburst had ripped away any pretense. "You don't belong here." I didn't belong at my own son's wedding. I didn't belong in the family I had sacrificed everything to create. I didn't belong in the future I had paid for with sweat and aching bones. The repetition of that cruel sentence became a drumbeat in my mind, each repetition hardening the ache into something colder. The shame, the humiliation, the betrayal, they were real, but beneath them, a new clarity was forming. She had revealed herself for what she truly was, arrogant and entitled, ungrateful and greedy, and I realized that she thought she had won, that by declaring me unworthy, she had erased me. But she had no idea what those words had awoken in me. Her cruelty was not the end of my story. Her cruelty was the reason I would rise, the reason I would show her that the man she dismissed as a burden had more power than she ever imagined, more than her words, more than the smirk on her face as she told me I didn't belong. What gutted me to my core was the silence that followed, the silence of the one person who should have stood between me and that humiliation, the silence of my son. I looked at him, desperately waiting for him to speak, to push back, to defend me the way a son should defend his father. But what I saw instead was hesitation, weakness, and cowardice. His eyes flickered toward me for the briefest moment, filled with a mixture of shame and uncertainty, before darting away like a guilty child caught in a lie. He pressed his lips tightly together, his jaw tense, but no words came, no protest, no objection, not even the faintest whisper of support. That silence was louder than any scream. It roared in my ears until I could barely hear anything else, and in that instant I realized the bond I thought was unbreakable had been severed. I remembered when those same eyes used to look up at me with trust, when as a boy he clutched my hand on his first day of school, afraid to let go until I told him he'd be all right. I remembered how he used to run into my arms after a long day, how he once thought of me as his protector, his guide, his rock. To see those eyes now, filled not with love or loyalty but with fear of offending his bride, cut deeper than any insult she could have hurled. I had prepared myself for her cruelty after all. I had seen glimpses of it before, but I had never prepared myself for his betrayal. He chose silence, and in choosing silence, he chose her. He chose to stand on the side of the woman who humiliated me, rather than the father who built his entire life from the ground up. I could almost feel the promise I once made to his mother crumble inside me, the promise to raise him right, to give him everything she never could. Was this the man my sacrifices had shaped? A man who would stand idly by while his wife shamed his father in front of the world? My chest ached with a heaviness I cannot describe, as though the breath had been knocked from me. But I forced my legs to keep moving, to carry me toward the exit, because staying there, waiting for a defense that would never come, would have broken me completely. His silence was a verdict, and it told me everything I needed to know. I had lost my son long before that moment. I just hadn't seen it until she made me face it. When I finally returned home that evening, the door creaked open to a silence so deep it pressed against my chest, a silence that mirrored the hollowness inside me. The house had always felt too big after my wife passed, but I had filled it with purpose, with the laughter and needs of my son, with the constant movement of a father trying to do the job of two parents. Now, walking inside after being cast out of his wedding, the walls felt wider, emptier, as though they were mocking me with their stillness. I set my keys on the table, the sound echoing through the rooms like a reminder that I was alone. My eyes drifted to the framed photographs on the shelf, each one a frozen memory of the boy I had raised, the gap-toothed smile from his first day of school, the awkward teenager clutching his diploma, the proud graduate in his cap and gown. Each picture was a testament to the years I had poured into him, each one proof of a love that had demanded everything of me. Yet now, those pictures seemed like lies, mocking me with a version of him that no longer existed. I walked slowly through the house, my hand brushing the back of the old sofa where he used to fall asleep after long nights studying, my feet dragging past the kitchen table where we once shared dinners. Simple meals that I stretched from little because money was tight, but meals that always ended with his laughter. That laughter was gone now, replaced by the memory of his silence, the silence that had condemned me more thoroughly than her cruel words ever could. I stood in the hallway for a long time, staring at the closed door of his old room, remembering the nights I would check in on him, watching his chest rise and fall, whispering a quiet promise to his mother that I would never fail him. But tonight, that door remained closed, and behind it were only dusty remnants of a childhood that had slipped away from me long ago. The grief weighed on me like a stone, settling deeper with every breath, until even the air felt heavy. I sank into my chair in the living room, the one that had once been my refuge after long shifts, and the silence pressed harder, wrapping around me like a shroud. For the first time in years, I allowed the tears to fall, hot and unrelenting, because there was no one left to hide them from. My son was gone, not in body, but in loyalty, in love, in spirit, and this empty house was the perfect mirror of that truth. The silence was not just quiet, it was abandonment made real. The sound of a life built for someone who had chosen to leave me behind. And in that silence, grief and betrayal coiled together inside me, dark and unyielding, waiting for what they would soon become. I sat there in that chair for what felt like hours, drowning in grief, replaying every detail of what had happened, and at first all I felt was sorrow, a hollow ache that consumed me. But as the night dragged on, that sorrow began to shift, hardening into something sharper, colder, something that burned with a different kind of fire. The more I thought about it, the clearer it became. I had not been treated as a father, as a man who had sacrificed everything to see his son stand proudly on his wedding day. No, I had been treated as an ATM, a bank account with a pulse, a resource to be tapped until it ran dry. That was all I was to them, and once they thought they had drained me, they tossed me aside like I was nothing. I could see it so clearly now. Every detail lining up in my mind, every contract I had signed, every check I had written, every sleepless night spent making sure the money would be there when it was needed. I paid for the venue, a grand hall that sparkled with chandeliers and marble floors, a place they never could have afforded without me. I paid for the catering, the endless trays of gourmet food, the wine that was supposed to flow freely through the night. I paid for the dress, the white gown she wore as she sneered at me, a gown that was supposed to symbolize purity and love, but looked to me now like nothing more than silk stitched with arrogance. I paid for the photography, the team of professionals meant to capture every perfect moment as though the beauty of the day could erase the ugliness of their hearts. Every corner of that wedding, every shining detail, every breath of luxury, it all existed because of me, and yet, in their eyes, I did not belong. I was not welcome, not cherished, not even respected. I had built the stage for their grand performance, and when it was time to play their parts, they shoved me into the shadows, believing I was too weak, too old, too broken to do anything but obey. My sorrow twisted into fury, but not the kind of fury that explodes and vanishes. This was colder, steadier, the kind of anger that sits deep in your bones and demands action. I thought of every sacrifice I had made, of every hour worked, of every dollar saved, and I realized that they had mistaken my kindness for weakness, my generosity for stupidity. They believed they could humiliate me and still reap the rewards of everything I had given. But they were wrong. They had no idea who I truly was beneath the quiet exterior, no idea of the resolve I had honed over decades of struggle, no idea of the steel that ran through me. That night, in the silence of my empty house, I made a promise to myself. If they saw me only as an ATM, then I would remind them exactly whose name was on every contract, whose money had made their fairy tale possible, and I would take it all back piece by piece until nothing remained of the day they thought was theirs. The anger inside me demanded more than thoughts. It demanded action, and so I rose from that chair and walked to the cabinet where I kept my most important papers. My hands were steady now, no longer trembling from sorrow, but firm with a purpose I had not felt in years. I pulled out the thick folder I had built over months of planning for this wedding, a folder stuffed with contracts, receipts, invoices, and agreements, every detail of the day they had so proudly claimed as theirs. I laid them out across the table, spreading them like pieces of a puzzle, and as my eyes scanned each page, a grim satisfaction began to settle over me. The venue contract, my name was right there at the top, my signature at the bottom, my payments logged in black ink. The catering agreement signed by me, paid for by me, every deposit and balance noted in my handwriting, the photography package, thousands of dollars to capture memories that I now intended to erase. The florist, the band, the decorators, the rental service for tables and linens, every single one tied back to me, every single one a thread I could cut with a single call. They thought I was nothing more than a burden, but in truth, I was the foundation upon which their whole charade stood. Without me, it would all collapse into dust. I picked up my pen and ran my thumb along its metal edge, feeling the weight of it, the symbolic power in something so simple. This was no longer just a pen. It was the weapon I would use to dismantle everything they had built on my back. My hand tightened around it, my knuckles whitening, as though by gripping it I was gripping my resolve itself. I took a deep breath, steadying myself, and allowed the cold clarity of my plan to take shape in my mind. I would not scream, I would not beg, I would not waste my energy on words that would fall on deaf ears. Instead, I would strike where it mattered most, through the very contracts they had so carelessly ignored, through the very money they had taken for granted. They believed they had stripped me of power when they humiliated me, but the truth was the opposite. All the power was still mine, resting in these papers, in these signatures, in these obligations bound by law. And with that knowledge, I began to see the path clearly, step by step, call by call, until their perfect wedding would unravel before their very eyes. I straightened the papers into a neat pile, not out of habit but out of ritual, as if organizing them was sealing my intent. My heart no longer ached with grief, my mind no longer clouded with sorrow. There was only the icy calm of a man who had been underestimated one time too many, a man ready to show them what it meant to mistake kindness for weakness. The plan was simple but devastating, and I was ready to see it through. I picked up the phone with a calmness that surprised even me, the same calmness that comes after a storm when destruction is already guaranteed and nothing more can be lost. The catering contract lay open before me, my name written clearly at the top, the amount I had already paid highlighted in bold numbers, proof that all of this had been mine to give and therefore mine to take away. I dialed the number with steady fingers, listening to the rings, each one echoing like the countdown to the first strike of war. When the caterer answered, their tone was polite, cheerful even, still basking in the glow of serving a grand event, but I cut through that lightness with words sharp and cold. "This is regarding the Johnson wedding," I said evenly, my voice carrying no hesitation. "The contract is under my name. I want to cancel immediately." Silence followed on the other end, the kind of silence that carried confusion, disbelief, and then the first traces of dread. "Cancel?" the man finally stammered. "Sir, do you mean the order for tomorrow's reception? Everything is already in progress?" I interrupted, my tone firmer now, deliberate. "No, I don't mean tomorrow. I mean now, effective immediately. I'll expect confirmation of the cancellation and arrangements for a refund, as stated in the contract terms." The shock in his voice was palpable, as though he had never expected such a thing, not from an event so large, not from a client who had appeared so invested. "But everything is scheduled. The food, the staff, the deliveries. This will cause chaos, sir." I let the weight of my silence linger before I answered, letting him feel the gravity of what I had already embraced. "Yes," I said finally, my tone flat as ice. "It will." There was nothing more to add, nothing more to explain. He didn't need to know why. The why belonged to me, and soon enough the consequences would speak louder than any justification. I ended the call with a firm press of my finger, setting the phone down slowly on the table, the faint click echoing through the empty room. My heart did not race, my hands did not shake. Instead, a strange sense of satisfaction spread through me, the first real breath of control I had taken since the moment she told me I didn't belong. This was the beginning, the first domino tipped, and I could already picture the ripple as everything else began to fall. Their perfect day was built on my sacrifices, my money, my name, and now I would strip it from them piece by piece. The shock in the caterer's voice was only a preview of the chaos that would soon engulf them. I reached for the next contract, the pen still waiting at my side, and I knew this was far from over. With the first call behind me, the path forward felt clearer, sharper, almost intoxicating in its precision. I picked up the florist contract next. The carefully itemized list of arrangements they had designed for the day, blooms in every shade of white and blush, symbols of purity and joy that now felt like a mockery of everything I had endured. My fingers dialed the number, and when the voice on the other end answered, I delivered the words as calmly as if I were ordering a cup of coffee. This is regarding the Johnson wedding, under my name. Cancel the order. There was a pause, a sharp intake of breath, then the hesitant protest. Sir, the flowers are already arranged. Deliveries are prepared. Are you certain? My lips pressed into a thin line, the anger inside me crystallizing into resolve. Yes, cancel it. The release I felt as I ended the call was not fleeting. It was tangible, like exhaling a breath I had been holding for years. I moved on to the photography contract, the one I had paid thousands for, to ensure every smile, every tear, every kiss would be captured in perfect detail. What a cruel irony that seemed now, the idea of immortalizing a day that had begun with my public humiliation. I pressed the phone to my ear, waiting for the chipper voice of the manager to answer, and when she did, I spoke the same words I had spoken before. Cancel the contract. Her disbelief was almost amusing. Cancel? Sir, this is a high-profile booking. Our team is all ready. I didn't let her finish. Cancel it. The firmness in my tone silenced her, and when she stammered her reluctant acknowledgement, I felt the weight of their perfect day unraveling further. Each, yes, cancel it, was like a blade slicing through the bonds that had held me down. Each confirmation a reminder that the power was still mine. The band came next, a lively group they had insisted on, expensive, exuberant, meant to flood the hall with celebration. I remembered writing that check, thinking only of my son's joy, never once imagining that those very instruments would be the soundtrack to my humiliation. I dialed, listened, and when the musician answered, I cut straight to the heart. Cancel the performance. He laughed at first, thinking it was a joke, but when I repeated myself, steady and unyielding, the laughter died. Are you serious? Do you know what this means? He asked, his voice cracking with panic. I closed my eyes, let the silence stretch, then delivered the same final blow. Yes, cancel it. One by one, I cut the strings, each call severing another piece of the tapestry they had woven with my money and my effort. And with each cancellation, a strange calm spread deeper through me, not joy, not satisfaction, but something more profound: release. I was no longer the man begging for a place at the table, no longer the father humiliated into silence. I was the hand pulling the rug from beneath their feet, and with every yes, cancel it, I reclaimed a piece of my dignity, piece by piece, until I could almost feel the hall of their dreams collapsing into the hollow shell it had always truly been. The next morning I dressed with deliberate care, not in grief as I had the night before, but in the quiet armor of a man who had chosen his course and would not waver. The folder of contracts and receipts rested under my arm as I walked into the bank, its weight no longer heavy with obligation but light with purpose. The air inside was cool, crisp, and humming with a low murmur of customers and clerks, but all of that faded as I approached the desk of the man who had overseen my accounts for years. He looked up, his expression shifting from routine professionalism to mild surprise when he saw me, then softening into respect as I explained why I had come. I laid the contracts out before him, the deposits, the payments, the agreements, every document that bore my name and my signature. "I want them reversed," I said simply, my voice steady, stripped of hesitation. He adjusted his glasses, scanning the pages carefully, his fingers tapping against the wood of his desk as he pieced it all together. For a moment, he was silent. Then he looked up at me with a nod. "You are within your rights," he said, his tone firm, the words carrying the weight of confirmation I had been waiting for. No one could dispute what was mine. Every dollar, every agreement, every payment flowed from me, and now, by law and by contract, it would flow back. He began typing, his hands moving swiftly across the keyboard, entering instructions, authorizations, reversals. I watched the screen reflect in his glasses, each click another step toward undoing the day they thought they owned. "The venue, the catering, the photographers, your deposits will be refunded. The cancellations are binding. They cannot challenge this," he explained, his voice as calm and assured as my own. The professionalism in his tone, the absolute clarity of his validation filled me with a sense of empowerment I had not felt in years. I was no longer a victim of humiliation. I was the architect of retribution. I leaned back in my chair, letting the cold satisfaction wash over me as he continued. "You have acted swiftly and correctly. Everything here is in order. They have no claim without your consent." The words were like a balm to the wounds carved into me days earlier, sealing them not with forgiveness but with resolve. As I signed the final authorizations, my hand did not tremble. Each signature was a strike of finality, each flourish of the pen another nail in the coffin of the illusion they had built. When it was done, he gathered the papers neatly, placed them back into the folder, and handed it to me with a respectful nod. "It's settled." Those two words carried more power than all the vows spoken at that wedding. I stood, thanked him with quiet dignity, and walked out of that bank taller, steadier, certain of what came next. I was no longer just canceling payments. I was reclaiming my power, and I knew that soon they would feel the ground shift beneath them. The image still burns vividly in my mind when I allow myself to picture it, the moment their carefully crafted illusion began to unravel in front of all those watching eyes. The ceremony had passed, the vows spoken, the applause forced, and as the guests filtered toward the reception hall, the first cracks began to show. The caterers, who should have been gliding through the doors with trays of hors d'oeuvres and champagne, were nowhere to be found. The staff stood idle, whispering nervously, their uniforms crisp but their hands empty. Confusion spread like wildfire among the guests, murmurs rising into questions, questions sharpening into complaints. Where is the food? Where is the wine? Then the flowers, those lavish arrangements meant to drape the hall in an air of opulence, began to wilt in absence, because no new deliveries had arrived. The centerpieces that had been promised were missing. The arch at the head of the room stood bare, stripped of its blossoms, a skeleton of what had been boasted about for weeks. The bride's family looked around, their smiles tightening, panic flickering in their eyes as they realized something was terribly wrong. And then came the photographers, their equipment already packed, cameras slung over their shoulders. One of them approached the bride's father, his voice low but firm. "We've been released from contract. Payment's been rescinded. "We're leaving." The words struck like a thunderclap, and suddenly the chaos became unavoidable. Guests gasped, some smirked, others whispered behind their hands as the spectacle unfolded. The bride herself, still in her gown of white satin and lace, spun around with fury etched across her face. "What do you mean you're leaving?" she demanded, her shrill voice carrying across the hall. But the photographers simply walked out, their refusal written in the set of their shoulders. The band, too, hesitated, their instruments half-tuned, their leader muttering about unpaid balances and legal obligations. Within minutes, they too began to pack up, the sound of cases latching shut, replacing the music that was supposed to guide the night. The bride's family scrambled, shouting orders, calling vendors, trying to demand explanations, but every call was met with the same icy truth: contracts canceled, deposits refunded, obligations void. They had built their castle in the sky, and now, brick by brick, it was crumbling into dust before their guests' very eyes. The crowd, once restless, now turned to mocking laughter, the whispers swelling into ridicule. "Can you believe this?" one woman muttered, her tone dripping with satisfaction. "All that bragging, and now look," another laughed openly. "A wedding with no food, no flowers, no music? It's a circus." The bride's cheeks burned crimson, her rage spilling over as she screamed at her parents, at her groom, at anyone within reach, desperate to find someone to blame, desperate to salvage the scraps of her pride. But there was no salvation. The humiliation was complete, her perfect day collapsing into chaos, and the irony was as sharp as glass. They had thought me powerless when they cast me out, when she told me I didn't belong. But as the hall descended into disorder, as panic gave way to despair, they were beginning to realize the truth. Everything they stood upon had been mine, and without me, they had nothing. The chaos at that wedding must have erupted like a storm, because by the time I returned home and set the folder of contracts back on the table, my phone began to buzz. At first it was just a single vibration, a number I recognized but ignored. Then another came, and another, the sound filling the quiet of my house until it was almost comical. I picked it up once, only to glance at the screen. My son. I let it ring until it cut off. Moments later, it lit up again, this time her number. I didn't even hesitate before silencing it. The buzzing became relentless, one call stacking on top of the next, my voicemail filling with their frantic voices, each one a testament to the disaster unfolding. I pressed the phone to my ear once, not to answer, but to listen. Her voice shrieked through the speaker, shrill, panicked, furious. "What have you done? How dare you? You've ruined everything." I could almost picture her, red-faced in that gown I had paid for, clawing at the air in rage as her perfect image unraveled. Another message followed, my son this time, his tone different, desperate, pleading. "Dad, please, you have to fix this. People are leaving. The vendors are gone. Everyone's looking at us like a joke. Please, please help." His words should have broken me, should have pierced the wall I had built, but they did not. Instead, they only hardened my resolve. For years I had been their safety net, their quiet, dependable savior. No matter what mistakes they made, no matter how ungrateful they were, I always stepped in to make things right. But not this time. This time I sat in my chair, staring at the phone vibrating across the table, and I let it buzz unanswered. I felt no guilt, only a cold clarity, a deep certainty that they were finally facing the consequences of their arrogance. Each call was a cry for help, Each voicemail another attempt to pull me back into the role of servant, of rescuer, of fool, and each time I refused, I felt stronger. I imagined her shrieking into the phone, her family panicking, my son caught in the middle, unable to understand why his father had turned to stone. But this was not cruelty, this was justice. They had treated me as if I were nothing but a wallet to be emptied, a burden to be dismissed, and now they were learning what life looked like without me. The buzzing slowed eventually, desperation giving way to exhaustion, and the silence that followed was sweeter than any music. My resolve was steel now, unshakable, and for the first time in years, I felt no weight pressing on my chest. They had wanted me gone from their perfect day, and so I was gone, entirely. As I sat in that quiet house, the phone finally silent after hours of buzzing, my mind drifted unbidden to a memory I had carried for decades, a memory so vivid it could have happened yesterday. I was standing in the dim hospital corridor, the walls pale and sterile, my heart heavier than it had ever been. His mother had just passed, taken from us too soon, leaving me with a boy barely old enough to understand what death meant. He clutched my hand so tightly his small fingers trembled, his eyes wide and wet with fear. "Where's Mommy?" he asked, his voice fragile, like porcelain that might shatter with the wrong word. My throat tightened, and I swallowed back the tears burning behind my eyes, because I knew I could not break, not in front of him. I crouched down to his level, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead, and I made him a promise that day. "She's gone, son," I whispered, my voice steady even though my soul was cracking in half. "But I'm here. I will always be here for you, no matter what." He threw his arms around my neck, clinging to me with the desperation of a child who had just lost half his world. And in that moment, I became determined to be the other half strong enough for both of us. I worked, I struggled, I sacrificed, but every choice I made after that day was shaped by that promise. I told myself his life would not be empty, that he would never feel abandoned, that he would grow into a man who knew he was loved beyond measure. Now, sitting alone after being cast out of his wedding, that memory sliced through me with a cruelty sharper than any words his bride could throw. I had given everything to keep my promise, to fill the void his mother left behind, and in return, he had stood silently as I was humiliated, as I was told I didn't belong. The look in his eyes that night, hesitant and weak, haunted me even more when placed beside the image of the little boy who once trusted me completely. That boy had clung to my hand like it was the only thing keeping him steady, and I had sworn to never let it go. But somewhere along the way, he had loosened his grip, not physically, but in spirit. Until now, he was a man who could watch me walk out of his life without lifting a finger to stop it. The betrayal cut deeper than flesh, deeper than bone. It cut into the very core of the promise I had lived by. For the first time since his mother's death, I wondered if I had failed her. I wondered if she would look at the man he had become and see my sacrifices as wasted, my devotion as futile. That thought hardened something inside me even further, turning grief into a colder, more resolute determination. If he had chosen her, if he had chosen silence, then he would also have to live with the weight of that choice. And I would live with the knowledge that I had done everything a father could, even if it meant letting him face the consequences alone. While I sat in my silent house, the story of the wedding began to spread like fire through dry grass, and though I wasn't there to see it with my own eyes, I heard every detail from those who had no love for the bride's family and were all too eager to recount their downfall. The guests, dressed in their finest clothes, had arrived expecting an extravagant display of wealth and refinement, the kind of event the bride's family had boasted about for months. Instead, what they witnessed was chaos unraveling in real time. Whispers began first, sharp and curious, as people noticed the empty tables, the missing flower arrangements, the absence of music that should have been filling the hall. Murmurs turned into questions, questions into laughter, and soon the carefully crafted illusion of grandeur collapsed under the weight of ridicule. Didn't they brag about this wedding costing a fortune? One woman sneered, her voice dripping with contempt. Looks like someone forgot to pay the bills. Another guest chuckled, loud enough for others to hear. Imagine inviting us all here to watch them fall apart. Best entertainment of the night, if you ask me. The bride's family, who had spent so long parading their status, their money, their superiority, now found themselves cornered by the very people they had sought to impress. Every missing dish, every bare table, every absent photographer became a public indictment of their failure, and the guests fed on it with merciless delight. The bride, once smug in her glittering gown, was now a spectacle of rage and humiliation, her voice raised in shrieks that only made the whispers sharper. "She looks like a spoiled child throwing a tantrum," someone whispered, and laughter followed. The groom fumbled beside her, his face pale, his voice lost beneath the storm of shame, and still the crowd watched with cruel amusement. High status meant nothing now. The masks had been ripped away, and what stood exposed was desperation and arrogance turned sour. The irony of it all was grim but deeply satisfying. They had thrown me out to protect their image, to present a perfect picture unmarred by the presence of the father they saw as a burden. But by cutting me out, they had cut the thread holding everything together. Instead of a proud display of wealth and beauty, their wedding had become a theater of disgrace, and the audience was savoring every scene. In the end, they achieved the opposite of what they craved. Their names, once spoken with admiration or envy, were now passed around in mockery, their reputation shredded in the very hall where they had tried to elevate themselves above everyone else. That was the justice I hadn't even needed to witness firsthand. The public humiliation they had forced on me was now theirs to endure, and while I sat far away, unseen and unheard, the knowledge of their downfall was more satisfying than any applause or confrontation could ever have been. The phone had gone quiet for a while, but I knew it wouldn't last. Desperation has a way of clawing back, and sure enough, it lit up again with my son's number flashing across the screen. I stared at it for a moment, weighing the silence I had already given him against the words that now pressed at the back of my throat. At last I answered, not because I owed him anything, but because I wanted him to hear the truth from my lips one final time. His voice tumbled out in a rush, frantic and broken. "Dad, please, you have to help us. Everything's fallen apart. The food never came. The band left. The photographers walked out. People are leaving. They're laughing at us. Please, Dad, please fix this." His words carried the weight of panic, the kind of panic I had always shielded him from, the kind I had spent decades working myself to the bone to ensure he would never feel. And now here he was, drowning in it. In the background I could hear her voice, shrill and venomous, screaming accusations into the air. "This is your fault. Your father ruined everything. Do something about him." Her rage was unfiltered, her contempt unmasked, and for a moment I closed my eyes, letting the sound confirm what I already knew, that she had never seen me as anything but a nuisance, and he had allowed her to drag him into her disdain. I waited for his voice again, the pleading tone of a man who still thought I would come running like I always had. But when I finally spoke, my words were calm, steady, final. You chose her. She chose to humiliate me. Now you both live with it." Silence followed, a stunned silence broken only by her distant shrieks. He tried to speak again, a stammering protest, but I cut him off. "I gave everything I had to you, every hour, every dollar, every ounce of my strength. And when I needed just one word from you, you gave me nothing. That silence was your choice, and this is mine." My voice did not rise, did not falter. It was not anger that filled me now, but the cool certainty of a man who had finally stopped begging for respect. He began to cry then, his sobs muffled by the chaos around him, but I felt nothing but a cold, hollow clarity. "Goodbye, son," I said softly, and with that I ended the call. The phone lay still in my hand, no longer a chain pulling me toward their demands, but a severed cord. I had spoken the truth, and there was nothing more to say. I knew it wouldn't take long before she made her move, and sure enough, not even an hour after I ended that call with my son, my phone lit up again, this time with her number. I almost ignored it, but curiosity compelled me to answer, to hear what venom she would spit now that her carefully polished facade had crumbled in front of everyone. The moment I pressed the phone to my ear, her voice exploded like broken glass. "You useless old man!" she screamed, her words dripping with rage and hatred. "Do you have any idea what you've done? You've ruined me. You've ruined everything. You've embarrassed us in front of everyone who matters. Do you think anyone will respect us after this? Do you think anyone will forget?" I held the phone away from my ear for a moment, the shrillness almost unbearable, but I could still hear her clearly. She didn't stop there. Her fury only grew more unhinged, her voice rising until I knew others in the background could hear every word. "All that money you wasted on yourself, all those years you kept it locked away when it could have been used to build something real. You think you're some kind of hero? You're nothing but a bitter, pathetic man clinging to control he doesn't deserve. Without your money, you're nothing. Do you hear me? Nothing." The irony struck me even then. She was revealing her true self, not just to me, but to everyone within earshot. Guests, family members, even my son could hear the greed and entitlement bleeding from her every word. This wasn't the sweet, graceful bride they had imagined. This was the truth. A woman whose only love was wealth, whose only respect was for status, who had seen me not as a father-in-law but as a bank to be drained dry. I could hear commotion behind her, voices trying to calm her, but she couldn't stop herself. She didn't even try. "You were supposed to give us more," she shrieked. "We deserved more, the house, the cars, the money you hoarded away. Do you know how much time I wasted pretending to respect you just to get what you owed us? And now you destroy everything just because you couldn't handle being told the truth that you don't belong." Her words, intended to wound me, only sharpened my calm resolve. She thought she was exposing my weakness, but what she had really done was expose herself to everyone listening. Her greed, her arrogance, her lack of shame, all of it spilled out in a flood she couldn't contain. I let her rant until she ran out of breath, and then, when the line finally went quiet for a moment, I spoke only once. "Thank you," I said softly, my tone almost gentle. "You've shown them all exactly who you are." And then I ended the call, leaving her rage to echo into the silence, knowing the damage she had done to her own reputation was far greater than anything I could have inflicted. News travels faster than wildfire in a small town, and by the next morning, the story of the disastrous wedding had already spread far beyond the walls of the hall. Neighbors whispered about it in grocery aisles, co-workers murmured over coffee, and strangers laughed about it in passing. What was supposed to be the grandest wedding of the season became a scandal, a cautionary tale recited with relish by anyone who caught wind of it. The bride's family, once so proud of their status, could not escape the humiliation. Every boast they had made, every arrogant claim about their wealth and refinement was now thrown back at them like rotten fruit. Instead of admiration, they were met with smirks and knowing glances, their names reduced to punchlines. People spoke of half-empty tables, missing flowers, a band that packed up mid-tune, and a bride shrieking like a banshee in her gown of lace. It was not just a failed wedding, it was a public unmasking, and the community reveled in it. But humiliation was only the beginning. With every contract canceled, deposits reversed, and payments withheld, the financial blow began to crush them. The bride's parents had already stretched themselves thin, taking loans to fund the extra flourishes they thought would elevate them above their peers. Now, without my money to prop them up, they were drowning in debts they could not cover. The vendors they had treated so poorly demanded compensation, bills piled up, and the illusion of wealth they had paraded crumbled into dust. The more they tried to claw back their reputation, the more they sank, because the truth was out and everyone knew it. Their grandeur had never been theirs. It had been mine, and I had taken it back. And then there was my son. At first I heard he tried to defend them, insisting that it was all a misunderstanding, that things had simply gone wrong. But the more he spoke, the more the whispers drowned him out, because no one believed it was chance. People had seen his bride's rage, heard her venomous words, watched the mask slip from her perfect smile, and they had seen his silence, his failure to stand by his father when it mattered most. He could not escape that truth, no matter how many excuses he tried to weave. Slowly, painfully, he began to realize what he had done. In choosing arrogance over loyalty, he had lost both. The bride's family dragged him down with them, their debts becoming his burdens, their humiliation staining his name. The friends he once boasted to now pitied him, or worse, mocked him. And through it all, he was left with the knowledge that it didn't have to be this way. One word, one defense, one act of loyalty could have spared him, but he had chosen silence. And now he was living with the cost of that silence, a cost that grew heavier with each passing day. When the noise of the scandal had faded into the distance and the last frantic calls stopped haunting my phone, I found myself sitting in my house once more, the same house that had felt like a tomb of grief the night I was cast out. But now, the silence was different. It no longer pressed on me like a weight or mocked me with memories of betrayal. Instead, it wrapped around me with a kind of clarity I hadn't known in years. For the first time since my wife died, the house was truly mine, free of demands, free of manipulation, free of the invisible chains that had bound me to people who saw me only as a wallet to be drained. The photographs on the wall still stared back at me, echoes of the boy I raised, of the promises I kept, but they no longer brought the ache of failure. They were reminders of what I had done, of the father I had been, and that was enough. I had carried out my duty. What my son chose afterward was his burden to bear, not mine. I sat in my chair, the one that had seen me through sleepless nights and bone-deep exhaustion, and I let the quiet settle into me like a balm. There was no regret, none at all. Because regret is for those who wonder if they made the right choice. I knew beyond doubt that I had. To have allowed them to use me, to have turned the other cheek yet again, would have been the true mistake. By taking back what was mine, I had taken back not only my money but my dignity. The house, once hollow, now felt solid again. Its silence not a void but a shield. No voices calling me a burden, no greedy demands disguised as affection, no son standing by a woman who despised me, just quiet. Pure, simple, honest quiet. And in that quiet, I discovered a peace I had forgotten existed. They could scramble in the ruins of their arrogance. They could drown in the debts they had courted. They could stew in the humiliation they had earned. None of it touched me anymore. I was free of their false love, free of their exploitation, free of the endless cycle of giving and never being respected in return. I had walked through humiliation and betrayal, but I had come out the other side standing tall. The house was empty, yes, but for the first time in decades, it was empty on my terms. I have replayed that day in my mind countless times, and though the sting of betrayal will never fully vanish, it no longer festers as a wound. It has become a scar, a mark that reminds me of both the pain I endured and the strength I found. I may have lost a son that day, not to death, but to weakness, to arrogance, to the poisonous grip of a woman who never saw me as anything more than a stepping stone. But in losing him, I found something far greater. I found myself again. For years, I allowed love and duty to blind me, to turn me into nothing but a provider, a man who gave without end and accepted disrespect as the price of being needed. That man is gone. In his place stands someone who finally understands that dignity is worth more than loyalty bought with money, that peace is worth more than hollow companionship, and that sometimes letting go is the only way to truly be free. I look around this quiet house now and feel no emptiness, because what fills it is mine, my hard work, my memories, my integrity. They can laugh at me, they can curse my name, they can call me selfish or bitter, but I know the truth, and the truth is enough. I walked away with nothing more than the clothes on my back, but I carried with me something they will never possess: self-respect. In the end, money can be spent, debts can be paid, reputations can rise and fall like the tide, but respect, real respect, cannot be bought. It must be earned, and mine cannot be stolen again. Your time means a lot. Thank you for listening to my journey. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments. To hear the next story, just click the box on the left.